Let's do a little bit of a review. We started chapter 18. It's about classification. It's really important to be able to group and sort organisms. One of the biggest ways to do that is to divide organisms up based on, based on a lot of things. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But one thing you already learned about was this particular little phrase. What does the K stand for? Kingdom.
You forgot over for.
Oh, I did forget.
Good pizza.
Great.
It's good
Spaghetti.
spaghetti.
What comes after the?
Spaghetti.
There you go. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And remember, when it comes to a scientific name, you take the genus and species name for that particular organism, and you have the scientific name. Remember, Linnaeus was the one who came up with this binomial nomenclature, this big word that just means two-part naming system. Remember, for the human race, we are Homo sapiens. So our genus name is Homo, and our species name is Sapiens. I couldn't italicize it very well, but normally this would be italicized. Capital letter for the H, lowercase letter for the S. That's how scientific names are made. I think another one we talked about was Felis concolor. Okay, you don't need to write this down. You should already know it. It's a bobcat, mountain lion. Okay, that's the scientific name for that little kitty. That's right. Okay. All right, so that is basically what we've covered up to this point. That's section 1 for chapter 18. Section 2, I'll even kind of say that's where we're at. We're at section 2 of chapter 18.
What does the P stand for? Because Robbie's does not have that.
Phylum.
Phylum. Oh, I missed that.
Oops, phylum.
I don't even talk about that yesterday.
Okay, well, kingdom, K stands for kingdom. I'll kind of break these out real quickly because it's important.
Then class.
Class,
Order.
order,
Genus.
Yeah.
family, genus, and species. So Genus. You should have this all written down, but I think it's good. I don't think we have that on film, so I think it's good we write these down anyway. Yeah, and remember, I did leave out domain. Robbie was quick to mention domain even comes before kingdom. Okay, so that's basically, you can group all organisms into one of 3 domains.
You say dumb,
That's right. One of them's like bacteria, one's archaea, one's eukarya. Yeah, we're in the eukarya one. Okay. All right, all that's review. Section 2. This is all about modern classification. Here's what that means. Now, they don't classify organisms the same way today as they did a long time ago. Okay. We kind of talked about this a little already, but let me remind you. And it's not like they totally throw it out the window that they don't classify organisms the old way. They just don't focus on it, that's for sure. There are 3 major ways you can classify an organism. The first 2 I'm going to talk about are used in the past, but they're really not used as much anymore. One of them is, I'm just going to kind of, based on physical characteristics. Physical characteristics and similarities. In other words, similarities. In other words, and it makes sense. Long time ago, they used to look at 2 organisms, and if they look alike and if they have the same features, they're probably related to each other. We should classify them together. And that kind of makes sense, but, and there's a big but in here, there are some serious limitations to this. Think about a bird and a bat. I realize up close, they look very different. But I don't know about you guys, when I'm at night and it's dusk and I look up at the sky and I see all these bats flying up above me, they really have a very similar structure to a bird in a lot of ways. You kind of have to look closely. Okay? In other words, if you're good, and by the way, if you didn't already know, they're 2 completely different species of organism. In fact, bats are mammals and birds are, well, not mammals, they're birds. So they're not even part of the same group at all. They're not even closely related at all. But if you looked at them from a just a kind of a physical characteristics look, they kind of do look that way. So here's my point. Yeah, it's maybe okay to a degree to look at how an organism physically looks, but when it comes to classifying, you need a better way. Let me give you another example. Dolphin and a shark. Speaking of sharks, they kind of look alike. You know, I don't know about you, but if that dorsal fin on a dolphin's sitting up above water coming at me, I wouldn't think twice. Okay? Dolphins are mammals. Sharks are not. Sharks are fish, basically. They couldn't even almost be more further apart as far as relation. But that's why you got to be careful. You have to have some other way to classify these organisms other than just the way they look. Okay, so another good way is another good way that was used. We kind of also talked about this. Remember, this is where we kind of started talking about ligers and zonkies. Okay?
Have you ever seen that movie?
No.
Napoleon Dynamite.
Oh, I hate that movie. My husband loves that movie, and I don't like movies like that, but that's funny. That's funny you brought that up. I forgot all about that. So they thought that you could put two organisms together and they're able to breed and produce offspring, then I tell you what, it makes sense that they're probably part of the same species. And it makes sense. And to a degree, that is true. But like we said before, there are always exceptions and limitations to that way of doing this as well. The liger. Okay, remember, that's an offspring of a tiger and a lion. And so it's a situation where you almost had you had a situation where two different species could potentially produce an offspring. Granted, most of the time they're sterile, but it's still possible. I think there actually are some species of wolves and dogs, you might even mention in this class, that can reproduce two different species and produce an offspring. So
cat and dogs.
And they definitely can. You can't get a cat and a dog together and have them produce. They can try, but they're not going to get anywhere. Okay, so you have to be able to produce offspring that are viable, which means they can go on and produce offspring themselves. There are more problems, though, with classifying to this way. This way also, think about all those extinct creatures out there. I don't know if you guys realize this or not, but there is a statistic that says that of all the organisms that have ever lived on Earth, 99% of them are not here today. They've gone extinct. In other words, that implies basically most species that have ever been around or will be around are going to become extinct at some point. Okay, so that's a pretty big number, and it would be very difficult to classify those organisms that aren't even around anymore, because we wouldn't really know who they can and cannot breed with. Hey, another thing, what about all those critters that don't even need a mate to reproduce? Okay, so this classification system also is limited in that sense of the asexual organisms out there. All right. So that leads me to the third and the final method of classification, and this is the one we use today. This is what I mean by that. Today, we classify organisms not based solely on what they look like, not based solely on who they breed, okay? It's another word, and it's a big word that you probably have never heard of before, but we need to talk about it. Phylogeny. Okay. I don't like to throw too many big words at it, you guys, but this is actually one of them that you probably should know. In other words, these days when scientists classify something, so it's classification based on evolutionary history. I'm just going to kind of say that. In other words, when scientists classify organisms today, they look at who they're most related to and classify them that way. In other words, who their closest ancestors are, who they are most closely related to. And I'll bet a lot of times you have two organisms that don't even look remotely like each other that are actually are classified very close to each other based on other things, and we'll talk about those other things. Let me give you an example. Crocodiles and birds don't look a thing alike, but crocodiles have far more in common with birds than crocodiles have with lizards, believe it or not. Even though crocodiles and lizards really kind of look alike, crocodiles and birds are definitely grouped together closer on a diagram than crocodiles and lizards. Hard to believe, huh? Real weird. But that's what I mean. That's why, I'll be honest, it would be tough to be a scientist in the classification field. I actually think I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't like it. It'd be tedious. It'd be like a lot of cat and dog fights with other scientists arguing out where someone should be on, it'd be tough to some degree. But, and it's changing. It's changing a lot these days. Okay. A couple other words that we need to know before I have you guys do kind of an activity here. Derived characteristics. Okay, this looks like another big term, but characteristics. But this is another term that is really important here. But you can break down this word and figure out what it means. Okay, let's start with characteristics. You guys know that. We have certain characteristics about us. We have certain features about us. Brown eyes, blue eyes, whatever. We have certain features about us. That's what that means. The word derived, if you don't know what that means that it's something that has been gained, something you acquire, something that you gain, something that's new. Okay, so it's a newly gained feature. That's what this word means. You have some newly gained feature. The reason I bring up this word is this. Let me give you kind of a technical definition and I'll explain it in layman's terms. It's inherited features. So inherited, that means that it's something that you inherit in your genetics. Inherited features that vary or that change among species. Inherited features that vary among species. Okay, here's what that means. Mammals, we're mammals. Okay? Mammals have certain derived characteristics, certain new features that make us different from reptiles. Okay? All right? Like hair. Okay, reptiles don't have hair. So hair would be considered a derived characteristic of mammals. Mammary glands, okay? Remember, one thing that separates mammals from from amphibians and reptiles is the fact that the females produce milk to feed their young. Okay, that's something that is a derived characteristic of mammals. So these things are all inherited features that vary among species, and they're very specific. Okay, so there's two types. I'm almost done, guys. I'm going along derived characteristics. In fact, I'm going to kind of take that same word and branch it off. There are two different types of derived characteristics that you can talk about. And I kind of want you to know this word. Even though it's a big word, I think it's important to know. Morphological. Well, morph. You guys could probably figure out what this word means. Morph, or shape, or form.
Great.
Okay. Huh? Derived characteristics can be morphological, which means they could be like a physical structure. You could refer to a physical structure as derived characteristics, and I just mentioned some. Hair, or hollow bones. There are some organisms that have hollow bones. There are some organisms that do not have hollow bones. Those are examples of morphological derived characteristics. Okay, the other one, biological, I'm going to call it. In other words, you can consider, remember when we talked about amino acids a while back? Remember, I don't know if you remember, let me kind of rehash this real quick. You have a piece of DNA. That DNA is like a code. That code is going to get changed into a couple of different ways. It's going to change into RNA first, and that's going to get translated into a certain amino acid. And remember, those amino acids are going to connect all together and form a protein, whatever protein that may be. Okay, so, but what this means is you can actually look at two different organisms, and the amino acid composition, or the percentage of a certain amino acid, can vary in organisms, and you can tell a lot by how organisms are related by just looking at their differences in the amounts of amino acids they have. So that's kind of what that means. Kind of along the same lines, DNA. You know, my DNA is definitely different than, you know, all of your guys'. The human DNA is very different from the DNA of a banana, or the DNA of a fish, or of a fruit fly. Okay? However, this is cool. If an organism has DNA that almost matches another organism or another species, chances are they're really related to each other. So if you're comparing three organisms, you got organism 1, organism 2, organism 3, different species, species 1, species 2, species 3, and if you're comparing the DNA in all three, and the first two have DNA that's like really, really, really the same, in other words, their A, T, C's, and G's almost match totally, chances are they're very much related to each other. So it's kind of cool. That's a cool field to go into. All right, almost done. I keep saying that, don't I?
Yeah.
I always do, though. I know that. All right, here's what you guys are going to be working on. Cladograms. I want to introduce you to what these things are. A cladogram is a branching diagram. So it almost looks like a tree branches, representing evolutionary history. In other words, if you're going to group organisms by their evolutionary history, remember phylogeny is that big word, if you're going to end up doing that, you better make a good, easy model for me to look at. And that's exactly what cladograms are. And I want you guys to be able to look at what these cladograms are. Let me show you what one looks like. What'd you say?
Yeah, we didn't get the.
Oh, oops. Sorry, guys. All right.
Is that branching or
So branching diagram, like a branch of a tree, branching diagram representing evolutionary history. I'll tell you what, I'll even draw some here. Here's your most basic cladogram that you'll ever see. There you go. There's like your most basic cladogram. Each of the branches here, I'll like label the one branch A and the one branch B. Each of those branches represents some species. So you have two species here. The fact that these two species come together at a point is a big deal. That means they're closely related. Let me tell you another thing. Where those two branches come together is going to represent what common ancestor they came from. In other words, down here, you have a branch that represents an ancestor. It's not A or B, but over time, from that common ancestor, species A came about, and then species B came about. Okay, so that's like the most simplest cladogram you'll ever see. They get really complicated looking. But that's the general idea, actually. Okay, let me show you what we got here. All right, there we go. That's that same picture, just in a different form. Try to ignore the colors. I don't know, they didn't really color code this really well, so try just to ignore the colors. All you see here is you have one branch going to the left, you have one branch going to the right, and you have this kind of middle point that they share that's representing, and they call it here an ancestral lineage. That's just a fancy way of saying it's their ancestor. It's who they came from, kind of deal. All right, they get a little complicated. Like this picture right here. Not too bad. Here you see a picture of 4 different species. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 different species. They're all related because they all come to a point, However, you can look at this cladogram and be able to kind of make some other generalizations about the individual species. In other words, look at 3 and 4. 3 and 4 come to a point together. That means that species 3 and 4 are very much related. They share a point. 3 and 4 are more closely related to each other than 2 and 3 are. Look at 2 and 3 don't even come to a point together. That's a big deal. They're still related, don't get me wrong, because way back here, they share a common ancestor. But that was kind of a long time ago. 3 and 4 over here, because they come to a point, they share a really recent common ancestor. That's what this implies. So that's what these cladograms kind of do. They show you who's related to who and by how much is kind of what these things show. Let's stick some actual animals in here. Okay, there's a cladogram. I'm just using that thing there to hold it in place. This is showing a bunch of vertebrates. Okay, vertebrates are animals with backbones, and this is just a sampling. They're not listing all of them, but check this out. You can see how it gets a little complicated, though. You get branching and then branches within branches, yada, yada, yada. Look at crocodiles and birds, if you see them on there. This cladogram shows me that crocodiles and birds are very closely related to each other because, look, they definitely share what's called a node. They share a point. I'll just call it a point. But look at lizards are way over here. You know, lizards and crocodiles don't even share a point. Now, they're still related to each other, but you kind of have to go back in history a bit before they're related to each other. Kind of a deal. Okay, so let this kind of be, I want you guys to do kind of a quick little activity for me. And that kind of goes along with these cladograms. And we'll be doing these cladograms for the next kind of couple of days here. Oh, there they are. All right, this should be pretty straightforward. For a Friday afternoon, it's not going to be too bad. No, we're actually going to kind of do this together. Just make sure.